The jungle was quiet, too quiet. Even the birds had stopped singing, and Jace could feel the tension in the air, like a wire pulled too tight. He moved carefully between the thick trees, sweat on his brow. The trap he had built with scraps from his crashed pod was ready, and now he needed food before the sun vanished behind those red clouds again. He had survived 4 nights on roots and stale water filtered through moss, but if he didn't catch something tonight, his strength would run out with the stars. He crouched by the trap, a simple spring-loaded snare disguised with alien vines and broken bark. It wasn't elegant, but it would hold anything under 70 pounds. His fingers traced the trigger line one more time. Then he backed away and returned to his small clearing, where his fire pit sat cold and silent, waiting. The sky above turned purple as alien moons began to peek through the canopy. Jace waited, watching, his stomach growling like a distant beast. Suddenly, the silence broke, not with a growl or a rustle, but a high-pitched cry, sharp and strange, followed by violent thrashing and then nothing. Jace grabbed his crude spear and rushed toward the trap, his boots crunching dry leaves beneath him. The vines were shaking. The trap had caught something, but the shape inside wasn't like any animal he'd seen before. He slowed down, his eyes narrowing as he saw the tangled figure suspended mid-air, thin limbs twitching, silvery blue skin glistening under the twin moons. It wasn't a beast, it wasn't a predator. It was a girl, an alien girl, her large eyes wild with terror, her hands trying to untangle herself as she whimpered in a language he couldn't understand. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, and the second she saw Jace, she screamed again. As if death had already claimed her, Jace dropped his spear slowly and raised his hands, his voice low and calm, though his heart raced like thunder. He didn't want to scare her more, but she was shaking, eyes darting around, and every time he took a step closer she shrieked louder, saying things he didn't know, but one word kept repeating, something like Eritkra, over and over, like a prayer or a curse or maybe both. He pulled out his knife slowly, and she flinched so hard she almost passed out, her breath shallow and rapid, her muscles frozen with fear. She thought he was going to gut her. That much was clear. But Jace just sliced through the vine holding her ankle and caught her as she dropped like a sack of feathers into his arms. She was light too. Light, like she hadn't eaten in days, and her skin was cold like stone soaked in moonlight. She struggled weakly, but he held her firm without hurting her. She whispered now, barely loud enough to hear, and tears rolled down her cheeks as she closed her eyes. Her body going limp in defeat, Jace carried her back to camp, glancing over his shoulder every few steps, expecting some alien beast or drone to rise out of the dark. But nothing came, only the sound of her slow breathing and the distant hum of strange insects in the trees. He laid her gently on the moss beside the fire pit, wrapped her in a thermal blanket from his emergency kit, and placed his water canister near her lips. She didn't move, just stared at him with glassy eyes full of fear and confusion. He pointed to the water, made a sipping motion, but she just turned her head away. Maybe she thought it was poison, or maybe she thought accepting it would mean giving up. The night deepened, and the wind turned colder. He lit a small fire, careful not to let the smoke rise too high. The flames cast soft light on her face, revealing sharp features, delicate ridges above her brows, and faint glowing patterns beneath her skin. She looked young, but not like a child. Maybe late teens in human years, maybe older, he didn't know. And she wasn't talking. He chewed on dry root and watched her. She curled tighter under the blanket, eyes open, never blinking, never looking away from him. Every time he moved, even to shift his weight or add a log to the fire. She flinched or whimpered like a cornered animal. And yet, she didn't run. Maybe she was too weak. Or maybe she was waiting for something worse. Jace wanted to talk, to explain that he wasn't going to hurt her. But he didn't know her language and she didn't know his. So he just sat there, slowly showing her his gear, letting her see that nothing he had was a weapon except the spear, which he set far away from her on purpose. Still she didn't sleep, not even when her eyes closed halfway. Her body trembled and her fingers gripped the edge of the blanket like it was the only thing keeping her alive. At some point, she sat up just a little and reached for the water, her hands shaking as she sipped, and then coughed. He didn't move, just watched as she drank again, slower this time, then stared at the fire like it was something sacred, her eyes still wide with terror, but her body slightly less stiff. Jace took that as a win, a small step in the right direction. He stayed awake the whole night, eyes flicking between the trees and the girl, unsure what kind of danger she might bring, unsure if this strange encounter was luck, fate, or the start of something he wasn't ready for. The sky began to lighten and the fire burned low. And still she sat there, alive, silent, watching, as if waiting for him to finally make his move, the move she feared more than death itself. But he never did. He just sat there too, guarding her as if she were the last living being in a world gone mad. And as the sun rose over the trees, golden light spilling onto her skin, she whispered again, a word he didn't understand. But this time, it didn't sound like fear. It sounded like a question, and Jace, though he didn't know the language, somehow understood that the trap had caught something more than food. It had caught a story, a secret, and maybe a second chance at something neither of them had ever known before, something fragile, like trust, like hope, or maybe even something deeper waiting to grow between two strangers lost in the wild. The first thing she noticed was the smell. It was smoky and warm, filled with strange spices and soft earth. The second thing she noticed was that she was still alive. Lyra opened her eyes slowly, afraid that if she moved too fast the human would strike her down. Her whole body ached, her ankle bruised from the trap, her wrists sore from struggling, and yet her heart beat steady now, no longer pounding with panic, just whispering with fear. She turned her head and saw the human again, sitting quietly near the fire, poking something in a small pot that hung above the flames. He looked tired but calm, his strange eyes reflecting the firelight like dull metal. His hair was messy, his arms were scarred, but he didn't look like a killer, not yet, though Lyra knew how appearances could lie. Her kind had told stories of humans who lured the weak with soft voices and false kindness, before they feasted like beasts. She shifted beneath the blanket, surprised by the warmth it gave, soft and unfamiliar, not made of woven leaf or hide-like. Her people used but something artificial and smooth. She wondered if it was part of the human's hunting tools. Maybe it helped preserve the flesh of prey before eating it. Maybe he was trying to keep her fresh. Her stomach growled and she froze. Terrified, he had heard. The human turned slowly, holding a strange cup toward her, filled with clear liquid, water. She knew that smell. It wasn't poisoned, not from what her senses told her. But that didn't mean it was safe. He said something in his own tongue, soft, low, then pushed the cup a little closer. Not too fast, not threatening, just near enough that she could take it if she chose to. She stared at him, trying to read the lines on his face, the twitch of his mouth, the movement of his eyes. He wasn't baring teeth, not smiling like the stories said humans did before biting. And when he blinked, it wasn't like a predator. It was slower, tired, even patient, that confused her more. than anything else, Lyra reached out, her fingers trembling, and took the cup slowly, half expecting him to snatch her arm or lash out. But he didn't move, just nodded once, then turned back to his fire. She sipped the water carefully, letting it touch her lips before swallowing. It was clean, too clean, not like the streams. In her forests it tasted like nothing, but it didn't burn, and that alone made her chest loosen a little. She looked around the camp, her eyes scanning every detail, trying to find sharp edges, escape paths, or hidden traps. But what she saw confused her again. His camp was messy, yes, but not cruel. It had a place for cooking, for resting, even a pile of soft things that might be bedding. Tools hung from a rope, but none were bloodied. None looked designed for slicing. Flesh, and that's when doubt began to form inside her. He was watching her again, not closely, but with quiet curiosity. She pulled the blanket tighter. Her voice caught in her throat. She wanted to ask why he hadn't taken her life, why she was warm instead of cold, fed instead of bound. But the words felt too big, too heavy, and she wasn't sure he would understand them anyway. Then she saw it, her reflection, in a piece of metal hanging beside the fire. Her hair was wild, her skin covered in grime, bruises on her neck and arms, and the look in her eyes. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was shame. She had believed she would die the moment he caught her, and yet here she was, breathing, wrapped in warmth, untouched. She hated that her instincts had betrayed her, that her people's warnings hadn't come true. At least not yet. The human stood slowly and walked away from the fire, toward a small container where he kept supplies. He opened it and took out something wrapped in fabric. She tensed again, every muscle ready to spring. But he walked back and unwrapped it carefully, revealing a flat round object with strange lines across it. He broke it in half and offered a piece to her. She sniffed it, unsure, then took it. It was dry but soft, a kind of food. And when she bit into it, her mouth watered with hunger. He smiled a little when she ate more, just a flicker of expression, gone in a moment, but it was real. Not the smile of a killer, not the grin of a predator, something different, something human. She didn't understand it, but it made her blink and look away. Confused and strangely warm, night fell deeper. Stars blinked above through the gaps in the leaves. The fire crackled quietly. And for a long time, they sat in silence, just watching each other. Two strangers from different worlds trapped in the same place, both broken in ways the other couldn't see. Lyra lay back down on the moss, pulling the blanket tighter, and for the first time, her eyes closed not from exhaustion, but because sleep finally felt safer than it had in weeks. But her dreams were wild, filled with fire and blood. She saw her people turning their backs on her, calling her unworthy, saw her escape into the forest, hunted like an animal, running for days, then the trap snapping shut, then the humans. Face, soft and shadowed by firelight, and in the dream, he reached out not with claws but with an open hand, and she didn't run. She woke with a start, gasping. But he wasn't beside her. The camp was still. The fire just embers now, the air cold and sharp. She sat up quickly, her heart pounding again. Was he gone? Had he finally decided she wasn't worth saving, or worse? Was he waiting behind her with a knife, ready to end what he had started? She reached for the metal stick he had left near the fire, unsure if it was a weapon or a tool, but before she could grab it, he returned, arms full of dry wood and strange fruits. He paused when he saw her awake and holding his tool. His eyes didn't show anger, just surprise, maybe a little fear too. He set the wood down slowly and raised his hands. Again, like before, a sign of peace, of calm, she watched him for a long time. Then placed the stick back on the ground, not because she trusted him, but because something inside her whispered that she could. He nodded once, then crouched to reignite the fire, and she moved a little closer, just a few inches, enough that he noticed but said nothing. She didn't know his name, he didn't know hers. They couldn't speak the same words, but something had changed. Something small and silent and powerful, and as the fire rose again, warming their faces, Lyra thought maybe this camp wasn't the cage, maybe it was something else. Maybe it was the start of something neither of them could understand yet. Not fully, but enough to keep breathing, enough to keep hoping, and enough to stay close when the darkness returned again. The next morning arrived with a strange stillness. The jungle was quiet again, but this time it wasn't empty, it was watching. Lyra felt it in her bones, in the air, even the insects moved slower, like something unseen was stalking through the trees. She sat near the fire, the warmth comforting but not enough to calm her nerves. She glanced at Jace, who was sharpening a stick into a new spear. His eyes focused, his face unreadable and still. He hadn't hurt her, not once, not even when she had touched his tools or drank his water without asking. But fear still lived inside her, deep and buried, whispering that safety was an illusion, that humans always turned cruel when given enough time. She told herself to run, to vanish into the jungle before he changed his mind. Before he remembered she was not like him, that her blood was different, her bones lighter, her voice strange. She waited until he turned away to check the traps again, then slipped behind the mossy wall of trees without a sound. Her feet moved fast, though her body was still weak. The roots pulled at her ankles. The branches scratched her arms, but she kept running, deeper and deeper into the unknown, guided only by instinct and desperation. Her breath came fast, her heart pounding louder than the creatures around her. She didn't care where she went, as long as it was away from him, away from his strange kindness that made her doubt everything she'd been taught. She stumbled into a stream, the cold water biting her legs. She crossed quickly, hoping to hide her scent, then ran again, farther, past trees that bent like watchers, past stones marked with old carvings. But she didn't know that this part of the jungle was worse. It was quiet for a reason, not because there was nothing, but because something ruled it. The first growl came from the trees above, deep and long, a vibration that shook her chest. She stopped instantly, her eyes wide, scanning the branches. The second growl came from her left, low and wet, like a throat filled with hunger. She turned slowly, her pulse frozen in her veins, and saw it, a beast twice her size, covered in black fur and bone-like plates. Its jaws wide, teeth curved like hooks, its eyes fixed on her like she was already dead. She tried to back away, but her foot slipped in the mud, and she fell hard, pain shooting through her wrist. The beast stepped forward, slow and certain, its breath steaming in the cool air. Lyra grabbed a sharp rock and held it up with both hands, shaking, ready to fight even though she knew it would mean nothing. The beast roared and lunged, and then fire exploded beside her. A spear flew through the air and struck the creature's side. It howled and turned, and there he was, Jace, charging forward with another weapon in hand, yelling in his strange language, his face wild and filled with something fierce. He threw another burning stick and the beast backed away, snarling, blood dripping from its flank. Jace stepped between it and Lyra, daring it to come closer. The beast growled again, but this time it stepped back, then vanished into the trees like a shadow dissolving in the wind. The danger was gone, but the fear remained. thick in her chest, her arms trembling, her eyes locked on the human who had saved her life again. Even after she had betrayed him, Jace turned slowly, breathing hard, sweat on his brow, cuts on his arms from the chase. He looked down at her, not angry, not yelling, just tired. He knelt beside her and reached for her wrist, the one she had hurt in the fall. She flinched but didn't pull away. His fingers were warm, gentle. He wrapped the injury with a soft cloth from his belt, then helped her to her feet without a word. She didn't know what to say. Her voice caught in her throat. She had run from him like a thief, and he had followed like a guardian. He could have let her die, could have watched from the shadows and done nothing, but he didn't. And that made everything worse, because now her fear was cracking, and something else was slipping in. He led her back to the camp slowly, helping her walk when her legs gave out, the jungle around them silent again, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. She watched his back as they walked, the way he moved, steady and strong, but not brutal, not cold, and she wondered what kind of human he was. What made him different from the monsters her people had spoken of in whispers and warnings? Back at the fire, he handed her a warm drink made from crushed fruit and boiled roots. She drank it silently, her hands still shaking, but the warmth filled her belly and steadied her nerves. He sat beside her, not close enough to touch, just near enough that she could feel his presence. She glanced at him and said a word in her language. It meant thank you, though she didn't know if he understood it. He looked at her, eyes soft, and said something back, slow and careful, then pointed to himself and said, "Jace." She blinked, confused at first, then realized it was his name. She hesitated, then pressed her palm to her chest and said, "Lyra." His mouth moved around the sound, trying to repeat it, and when he got it almost right, she nodded. That night, she didn't sleep with one eye open. She still stayed alert, still kept the blanket tight around her, but she let herself close both eyes, let the sounds of the jungle mix with the quiet crackle of the fire, and drifted somewhere between rest and memory. In her dream, she saw herself in the trap again. But this time when the human came, he didn't look like a hunter. He looked like light in the dark, and she wasn't afraid. The next morning, she woke before him, and for the first time, she didn't think about running. She just sat near the fire, holding her wrapped wrist, watching the rising sun spill gold across his sleeping face, and wondered what he saw when he looked at her. A prisoner, a threat, or maybe something more. Whatever it was, she knew now that this was not just survival anymore. Something had started between them, something fragile but real, like a spark in the cold, and it terrified her more than the beast ever could. The sun had risen higher than usual that day, its golden light pouring through the thick canopy and casting broken shadows across the forest floor. The air was thick with mist, but Lyra didn't feel cold anymore. Not when she sat beside the fire, not when Jace was just a few feet away, carving something from a thick branch with the edge of a sharp stone. He worked quietly, focused, but his presence was like armor around her. Solid, unspoken, and warm, she held the small bowl he had given her, drinking slowly. The mixture was bitter but sweet, made from fruit and something she couldn't name. But she didn't ask what was inside, not anymore, not after what he had done, not after he ran into the darkened fire just to keep her alive. Still, her chest felt heavy, not with fear, but with something worse. Guilt. She watched him, the way his jaw clenched as he carved, the small frown between his brows, the quiet breath leaving his lips as he shaped the wood. She wanted to speak, but didn't know how. The words in his language were still too many and too tangled. So she closed her eyes and tried to think in his rhythm, Short words, clear meaning, slow voice. When she opened her mouth, the words came out broken, but she forced them anyway. Her voice cracked like old stone, soft and shaking. "Why?" she asked, and his hand stopped moving. He looked up slowly, confused, so she repeated, pressing her hand to her chest, "Why save me?" He tilted his head, trying to understand, then pointed at her. Then at the sky, then at his chest, and said her name gently, "Lyra." And she swallowed hard because he said it like it mattered. Like she mattered, and no one had said her name like that in a long time. Her lips trembled. She looked down. Hands tight around the bowl, she whispered the truth, not knowing if he would understand, not caring, because her heart needed to release the poison she had carried for too long. "My people left me," she said, each word slow, each word a wound. "They said I was wrong, broken, impure." Jace didn't speak, didn't interrupt. He just sat still and listened. And somehow that silence helped her speak more. "I was born with colors on my skin," she said, pointing to the soft glow beneath her arms and collar. "My blood is mixed. My father was not one of them. They said I was a mistake, that I would bring shame." The jungle was quiet again, but this time it felt like it was listening too. The wind moving through the trees like soft breath, the fire cracking slowly between them. And her heart felt lighter as the truth poured out like spilled water. "They hunted me when I ran, even though I was still one of them. They chased me like prey. And I thought when your trap caught me, I thought you were one of them too." Jace reached for something near the fire, a small fruit, and gently rolled it toward her. It stopped at her knee and waited like an offering. She looked at it, then at him, and he smiled slightly. Not with his mouth, but with his eyes, like he understood just enough to say without words that she was safe now, that her story didn't scare him away. She took the fruit and held it close, and something in her chest shifted again, something that felt like trust growing slow roots. Not fast, not deep yet, but strong enough to hold her in place. Later, when the sun dipped behind, the clouds in the air cooled again. They sat closer to the fire, and Jace pulled out a small black box. Its surface scratched and dirty. He opened it carefully, revealing a flickering screen. She leaned in curious, and he tapped it a few times before a tiny image appeared. Was a human child, smiling, waving, speaking words she didn't understand. Then a woman, older, maybe his family, maybe his home. She looked at him and saw the weight in his eyes, the ache of distance. And she realized he too was far from his people, far from the place he called home. They were both alone, both lost, and yet somehow found each other in this cruel forest, both thrown away, but not broken yet. She pressed her hand to her chest. Again, not in pain, but in recognition, and not at once. Not because she understood everything, but because she felt enough. The fire burned low, and the stars peeked through the gaps above. The night was calm, but their silence was full of something stronger than sound. A quiet connection building slowly in the spaces between words and glances. And still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching, not from the trees, but from above then. She saw it, a flash of silver in the sky, fast and sharp. Like a falling star that didn't fall. Her breath caught. She rose to her feet, eyes locked on the shape, and Jace followed her gaze. He stood beside her, holding his spear. The light moved across the sky again, slower this time, scanning. She stepped back, her voice shaking, one word slipping from her lips like poison. "Searchers." Jace looked at her, then back at the light, and understood. He didn't need translation for that. He could feel it in the way she trembled, in the way her hands closed into fists. These were the ones who had cast her out. the ones who wanted her gone. He moved fast, packing supplies, dousing the fire, breaking their camp down in seconds. She moved too, slower, heart racing, fear pulsing in every breath. And as they ran into the dark trees, she whispered to herself that maybe she didn't have to run alone this time. And behind them, the light moved again, following the trail they left behind, quiet and cold, like the past returning to finish what it had started. The wind howled through the trees like a warning carried by ghosts. Branches bent and cracked above their heads as Jace pulled Lyra through the thick underbrush. Every sound behind them felt like footsteps, like boots pounding against roots and stone. The silver light in the sky had passed once already, but they both knew it'd come back. And this time it would not leave empty-handed. They didn't speak, didn't need to. Their steps matched, fast and quiet. Jace moved with purpose, his hands rough but steady as he led her deeper into parts of the jungle where even the insects dared not sing. Lyra could barely keep up, but the fear in her chest was louder than the ache in her legs. Her people were near, the ones who had branded her impure, who had left her to be hunted like a beast. And if they found her now, they would not ask questions. They would only finish what they had started. The air turned colder as they reached a narrow crevice between two moss-covered cliffs. Jace slid inside first, then pulled her in after. The darkness swallowed them like a mouth, but it was safe, hidden. A place where the sky could not see. They crouched in silence, listening, her breath ragged, his eyes focused, and then came the hum, low and steady, a sound not made by birds or beasts. It was metal, it was engines, it was them. Lyra closed her eyes, hands over her ears, trying to block out the sound that haunted her dreams. She whispered the name of the ship, not to Jace, but to herself, a whisper full of pain. Judicator. Jace turned to her, his expression sharp. He knew they were close now. He touched her shoulder, and she looked at him, her eyes wide with panic. He didn't speak, just held her gaze, firm and unshaking, and in that moment she felt something anchor her, like even if the world collapsed, he would not let her fall. The hum faded slowly, but the fear didn't. They waited in the dark for what felt like hours until silence returned to the jungle. Jace moved first, peeking through a crack in the rock, then signaled with a nod. They slipped out and moved again, this time even slower, every step measured. Every sound beneath their feet watched like a trap, but no one came, not yet. When they returned to the outer edge of the forest where the ground dipped toward a deep ravine, Jace stopped and knelt beside a fallen tree. From underneath he pulled out a small bag, one she hadn't seen before. Inside were tools, cables, parts of machines, and a small metal rod glowing faintly at the tip. He pressed it into the dirt, and it lit up with a soft pulse, then spread a thin blue mist in the air. Lyra didn't understand it, but she watched as he adjusted it carefully and nodded to himself. A few moments later, a new sound arrived, not from the sky but from the trees, soft steps, metal scraping bark, the faint buzz of communication signals in a language she had once known like her own breath. And then a voice, loud and firm, echoing through the trees with cold authority. Subject E47, reveal yourself. You are trespassing in restricted zone. Surrender for cleansing. Lyra froze. Her legs refused to move, her mouth dry as stone. They had found her. They knew she was here. Jace stood slowly, placing his body between her and the voice. His hands open, but not empty. The spear was strapped to his back, but not drawn. His stance calm but ready. The voice repeated the demand, and when no answer came, figures emerged from the trees, tall, armored, weapons in hand. Glowing eyes behind silver helmets. There were 5 of them, maybe more in hiding. Jace didn't flinch. He raised one hand and spoke slowly. "She's not going with you." The soldiers paused, confused. One stepped forward, his voice sharper now. "Human, this matter does not involve you. Step aside." Lyra peeked from behind Jace and the soldiers. Eyes locked onto her, his weapon lifted slightly, and she could almost feel the trigger tremble beneath his fingers. She stepped back quickly, her body shaking. Her voice caught in her throat. Jace raised his other hand now, his voice louder. Clearer. "You want her, you'll have to go through me." The jungle held its breath. The wind stopped, the birds went silent, the soldiers tensed, weapons humming. And for a heartbeat, everything was still. Then one of them moved, just an inch forward, just enough to shift weight. And that was all Jace needed. He reached back, pulled his spear, and hurled it through the air in one motion. It struck the first soldier's helmet with a crack, not enough to kill but enough to stun. Then he lunged forward, grabbing one of the vines he had tied earlier to a branch above, yanking it down. It triggered a trap he had hidden hours before. The ground beneath the soldiers erupted with smoke and thorns. The jungle became chaos. Lyra ran, ducking behind roots and trees as Jace fought with everything he had. She heard the shouts, the thuds, the clash of metal and wood, then the scream of something burning. He had lit fire traps too. She didn't know how many enemies were falling, but she knew one thing with her whole soul: he was doing it for her. When it was over, smoke drifted through the trees like ghosts returning to sleep. 3 soldiers lay on the ground, unmoving. 2 others crawled away into the mist, weapons broken, armor cracked. Jace stood in the center, bleeding from his arm, breathing heavy, but still standing. His eyes burning with something more than rage, something like defiance. Lyra ran to him, caught his arm, helped him sit as he winced from the pain. He looked at her and gave a weak smile. "Told them no," he whispered. And she couldn't stop the tears from falling, not this time. She pressed her forehead to his, her hands trembling, and whispered the one word that meant more than anything. "Now, stay." He nodded slowly, and around them the jungle began to breathe again, unaware of the war that had just been fought under its branches. But the fire in their hearts had only just begun. The forest floor was soaked with blood and ash. The bodies of the fallen were hidden now beneath vines and smoke, but their scent still hung heavy in the air. Lyra and Jace didn't speak as they moved, his arm wrapped in torn cloth, her hands still trembling. They walked through shadows deeper than night, the jungle around them silent, but not still, watching, waiting, breathing with them and against them. Every step felt slower than the last. Jace's wound wasn't deep, but it burned. The fight had drained him, and though he tried to hide it, she saw the stiffness in his walk, the way he winced when his foot touched the ground wrong. Lyra stayed close, her senses alert, ears twitching at every snap of a twig, every shift of a leaf. She had lived in this forest before she was hunted. She knew how it moved when danger followed. They climbed a narrow ridge where the roots of trees wrapped over rocks like fingers trying to hold the earth in place. The wind howled between branches, carrying strange sounds, not voices, not machines, but something older, something wild. She stopped suddenly, her eyes wide, her breath caught in her throat. She reached out and grabbed Jace's good arm, her voice just a whisper. "Don't move." He froze, trusting her instantly, even without knowing what she heard. Then it came. A low snarl. Not far off, not from a machine, but from something alive. Something hunting. Jace slowly crouched, gripping his knife, his spear lost during the last fight, his hands steady but his breath tight. Lyra crouched beside him, pointing toward a clearing. Ahead were three shapes slinked through the tall grass. Not soldiers, not her kind, but beasts, sleek and dark, with glowing red eyes and long tails that twitched like blades. She knew these creatures. They were called Varath, jungle stalkers. Drawn to the smell of blood and fire, they did not fear humans. They did not fear anyone. And they never attacked alone. Her heart pounded, her body remembering how close she had come to death once before when she saw them in the caves. But this time she was not alone, and she would not run again. Jace looked at her, then at the beasts, then at the slope behind them. Too steep to climb quickly, too exposed to hide. They had one choice: fight or die. Lyra reached into her pouch and pulled out two sharp stones. Not weapons, but tools used for cutting roots. Today they would be blades. She nodded once and said one word: together. The Varath moved faster now, heads low, teeth bared, their muscles tight beneath striped fur. The biggest one leaped first, jaws wide, claws flashing, but Jace stepped forward, his knife catching the light for just a moment before it plunged into flesh. The beast screamed and twisted, its body crashing into him as it fell. He rolled away just as another lunged from the side. Lyra jumped in then, her stone slicing across the creature's face, its shriek filling the air as it backed away, blood dripping from its eye. The third beast circled behind them. Smarter, patient, it waited for a mistake. And when Lyra turned to check Jace's wound again, it struck. Its claws slashed the side of her leg, tearing skin and pulling her down. She screamed but kicked hard, her foot slamming into its jaw. Jace was already there, his blade flashing once, twice. Blood sprayed the leaves and the Varath collapsed. Twitching, broken, breathing hard, Lyra clutched her leg, pain roaring through her body. She tried to stand but stumbled. Jace caught her, lifting her with both arms. His teeth gritted against the fire in his own wounds. Together they limped toward the thickest part of the forest where the trees formed walls and the ground sloped down into hidden caves. Roots above, tunnels below, old places where the sunlight never touched. They entered one of those caves as the wind outside grew wilder, and rain began to fall in heavy sheets. Jace laid her down gently against a mossy wall, his fingers trembling. As he checked her leg, she was bleeding, not badly, but enough that she needed rest. He tied the wound with strips of cloth, cleaned it with water from his flask, and covered her with the same blanket she once feared would be her death. She watched him through heavy eyes, his face drawn with pain, his arms stained with blood, his body shaking from exhaustion. But he didn't stop, didn't complain, didn't leave her side, even when thunder roared above and water poured through cracks in the cave roof. He just sat beside her, holding a small stone knife, eyes on the cave entrance, as if daring anything else to come. Hours passed like shadows, slow and silent. Lyra drifted in and out of sleep, her dreams filled with fire and teeth, but always with him standing between her and the end. When she woke again, the rain had stopped and Jace was still there, eyes half closed but alert. He looked at her and smiled, barely a flicker, but real. She reached for his hand, not because she was afraid, but because she didn't want to forget what it felt like to be safe, even for a moment. He took it without hesitation, their fingers closing slowly, and the silence between them filled with something warmer than the fire ever had. Outside, jungle breathed again, the beasts gone, the soldiers scattered. But danger was never far. They both knew that, and yet neither of them spoke of turning back, because what waited behind them was worse than what lay ahead. They had chosen this path, not because it was easy, but because it was theirs, and deep. In the cave, as the stars blinked once more through cracks in the stone ceiling, Jace whispered her name like a promise, and Lyra, tired and broken but alive, whispered his in return, like a vow that whatever hunted them next, they would face it not as prey, not as enemies, but as something more. The cave was cold, but not silent. Water dripped from the stone above, slow and steady like a ticking clock that reminded them time was never their ally. Jace sat near the entrance, his back against the rock, his arms still sore and wrapped in bandages, his eyes staring into the dark where nothing moved but everything could still arrive. Lyra slept beside him, her breathing soft, her wound clean but her body still weak. He listened to her breath like a rhythm that kept him steady, and every time she exhaled, he knew he was not ready to lose her. But the jungle had not given up its hunt, and neither had the ones in the sky. They came again with lights that flashed. Through the clouds they came with new machines, sharper than before, quieter, deadlier. The kind that did not call out names or give warnings, the kind that only tracked and captured, or worse, erased. Jace saw the first signal at dawn, a soft red glow that passed over the trees and left behind no sound, only heat. He knew it meant they were running out of time, and the next move would be the final one. Lyra woke to find him standing, packing what little they had left. His movements quick but gentle, her voice cracked through the silence as she sat up. "You saw them," and he nodded once, not with fear, but with certainty. She stood too, even with pain still in her leg. Her body obeyed her without question now, because fear was no longer in control. Choice was. She walked to him and touched his arm, her eyes holding his, and said the words she had been hiding since the moment she saw the light in the sky. "They want me, not you." He shook his head, reaching to close his bag, but she didn't let him turn away. Her fingers held his wrist tightly, her voice stronger now. "If I give myself to them, you can escape. They won't care about a human in the forest. They only want their mistake back, their shame, their proof that their blood isn't pure." Jace stared at her, his jaw tight, his breath heavy. Then he dropped the bag and stepped closer, his hands on her shoulders, his voice low and fierce. "You are not a mistake." And the way he said it made her eyes burn, because it sounded like truth, like something she had never been told before. She wanted to believe it. But the wind outside the cave whispered something else. It whispered that this story could only end one way. Still, she didn't run, didn't beg, didn't hide behind him. She stepped out of the cave first, her body straight, her face calm. And when the first drone passed above, scanning the ground with its cold beam, she walked straight into it. Letting the red light fall on her skin, she raised her hands and spoke in her language. "I surrender." The trees answered with silence, but the sky did not. A low hum grew louder, deeper. The sound of descending ships, cloaked in storm and metal. Jace ran to her side, grabbing her hand, refusing to let her go, even as the earth trembled beneath them. Even as the machines landed in fire and smoke, and armored figures stepped out, taller than before, their faces covered in silver, their weapons already aimed at her chest. She stepped forward anyway, and Jace moved with her, matching her pace, refusing to leave her side, even when the lead soldier raised a hand and said in a deep, cold voice, "The human is not required." Lyra turned to Jace, her eyes filled with fear and something stronger, sorrow, and whispered, "Go." But Jace only gripped her hand tighter, his voice firm. "No." The soldier repeated the order, louder this time. "He does not belong to this case. He will be eliminated." And in that moment, something changed. In Lyra's eyes, she stepped in front of Jace, her voice louder than it had ever been. "I am surrendering. He saved me. He never harmed me. If you hurt him, I will resist." The soldiers paused, their weapons still raised. The leader stepped forward, scanning her face, then lowered his weapon slowly. The others followed, and for a brief moment, it seemed like they might let them live. Then from the trees came a sound neither side expected, a roar louder than thunder, followed by crashing trees and a wall of fire. The jungle itself rose up. The beasts that had once stalked them now charged through the smoke. Something had awakened them, something older and angrier than any machine. The soldiers turned their weapons, firing blindly, but the creatures didn't stop. They smashed into the metal suits with claws and teeth. Lyra grabbed Jace's hand and pulled him back toward the cave, yelling his name, but he turned, grabbed one of the fallen weapons, and started firing, covering their escape with every ounce of strength left in his body. They reached the cave again, ducking behind the stones, Lyra breathing hard, Jace bleeding again. But they were alive. Above them the ships retreated. The machines pulled back and silence fell once more. But this time it felt like a choice, like the sky had seen something it didn't expect, and chose not to fight again. Night came slow, stars blinking above them like witnesses, and in the soft glow of firelight, Lyra leaned against Jace, her head on his shoulder, her voice soft. "You could have left." And he answered without thinking, "So could you." They didn't speak after that. Words weren't needed, only the warmth between them, only the beat of hearts that had chosen each other when no one else would. The jungle around them was still wild, still dangerous, but it no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a place where something new could begin, something not defined by blood or orders or the mistakes of the past, but by two lives that refused to give up on each other, no matter the cost. And as dawn touched the edge of the sky, turning the leaves gold and green, they stood once more, side by side, not as prey, not as fugitives, but as something stronger, something rare, something free.